This week on the Unamplified podcast.
Welcome back to the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and it feels good to be back on set. And as always, I have my amazing co-host.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Andrea, and of course, I'm the dramatic one.
Yes, we're still, trying to recover from the African Cup of Nations.
Oh, yes.
And today we have two amazing guests. Before we pulled these two young men, it was not easy, but I'm happy to have them joining us today. They are sport analysts, they are sport lovers, and we'll be having a lot of conversation around the just concluded African Cup of Nations. Mr. Afolabi Adekayoja, it's so good to have you today.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And Suleiman Oyo.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I know you also have a podcast.
I'm the host of the Rants of a Niger Boy podcast.
Rants of a Niger Boy. Oshe Niger Boy.
That's what I represent.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I know we all follow the African Cup of Nations. What are our reflections from that? Anyone can go, because me, I'm still trying to take, our loss. Even though I'm celebrating Côte d'Ivoire for my West African brothers and sisters. But what are your reflections, Afolabi?
I know that a lot of Nigerians, they have many expectations going into the tournament. So Nigeria lost its pre-tournament game to Guinea. We had quite a lot of injuries and quite some prominent players pulling out because of different issues. So we didn't go into the tournament as one of the heavy favorites. So to reach the final, to get to where we got to, no major distractions in terms of people not being paid on time. I think there were some areas to be proud of or to be happy about. Obviously, it's not good to get that far and not win. It was still very, very disappointing because, we needed that win. I think many Nigerians were really united about the fact that there were many issues going on and we needed something that could really keep us together. It's just really good news,
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it was really down on that part, but I think there are some positives that we can look at and we can really hope to build on for the next tournament next year.
Yeah, I love the idea of some positives we can look at, but the fact is that it was a unifying factor for us, and I think for the moment it allowed us to, sort of forget some of our realities in Nigeria.
I mean, I was watching a game with someone, and then he was like, that's the finals actually. I was watching with someone, and then after Nigeria had lost, he was like, let me go back to my struggles. I'm like, wow. So this was supposed to help you forget your struggles.
Which was why I thought we needed a win. And Suleiman, what do you think?
For the AFCON in general, there are two ways you can always look at it. Going in as a fan of the Super Eagles or going in as a fan of football. Yeah. I went in as both a fan of football and a fan of Super Eagles.
Cool.
But every tournament, you need certain things to make the tournament stand out. You need it to be dramatic. You need to be interesting. You need elements of controversy. You need good football. You need a fairy tale story and an underdog story. And it had everything. The thing about these AFCONs that I would say is that I was never really impressed by the performances of Nigeria. We weren't good in the group stages, but there was a way we were able to narrowly squeak in wins, narrowly squeezing wins, and went to the final. But overall, I think it was a good tournament. You look at the hype. Football is always going to be consumed subjectively, so there are just certain metrics you use to measure the best tournament. I have to look at viewership. They had close to 2 billion viewers, close to 160 countries. The journalists that applied to cover the AFCON, the previous AFCON was 3,000, this AFCON was 6,000. So if you look at those metrics and can say how well the world followed it, you could see that it's probably argumentatively, when we look at numbers, it could be the biggest AFCON in history.
Yeah, I saw the numbers, and then I think I saw that on this Twitter handle, Africa Facts or so, and then it said it had 2 billion viewers. The Super Bowl was barely
Super Bowl was 124 million.
And in fact, the reason it got that number was because of the Taylor Swift factor, because I know CNN, they were running this analysis around how this was the most viewed, and it was because of Taylor Swift. I'm like, wow, the Swift is
not
good.
Because of she played a huge role.
They said she made it. She made the viewership because her fans also had to tune in because they knew she would be there. But when he was talking about the reflections, right, from AFCON, he said there were several factors to look at. The underdogs. You said there were those who, the fairy tale stories. What would be one of those outstanding stories for you from?
I mean, as painful as it is, Sebastian Haller coming back from a fight with cancer and then scoring the winning goal, not just in the semi-final, but in the final as well. You know, I mean, like you don't write films as good as that. So I'm sure somewhere right now, Netflix and Prime are really fighting.
Producers are getting ready
because like that's really just the perfect icing on the cake of a tournament that was really, really big. So for neutrals, of which I know there were many, that was really the perfect outcome, right? But I think one of my best stories was Mauritania. So Mauritania is a country that, you know, like its league has actually been suspended several times. They haven't been able to perform as well. And then we have had quite a number of countries that have made their debuts at the AFCON over the last couple of years because AFCON expanded from 16 countries to 24. Yeah. And Mauritania was one of those ones that people just really look at some of these countries like, okay, you know what, you're filling the numbers. You know, we have 24 and really and truly, there are only like 8 or 12 that are really serious. The other ones are just going to be there, get your customary, you know, lashing and then you now go home. Mauritania actually pulled through. You know, Mauritania has been building its capacity. It's built its league. You know, it got a very good coach. It got Ali. So the coach that it got was the person who had managed Comoros to the second round at the last tournament, and they knocked out Ghana on the way there. Okay. So it was a case where they had actually built and developed their capacity. So Mauritania was one. You know, you have Cape Verde, obviously, that reached the quarterfinal. So I think one thing I was really happy about was that historically we have these big countries, you know, the ones that you expect to see at the business stage.
Yes.
The top 5 ranked countries in Africa did not make it to the quarterfinals.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, you know, Morocco that was at the World Cup semi-final, Senegal, Egypt, you know, Algeria. You know, some of them got knocked out in the group stages. So I think what was really good was the fact that we're reaching a stage where, at least at this tournament, there is no disregard for small states or big states. Anybody can get it. So it's a case where we're building that capacity. I think for anybody who loves African football and is seeing that development, it's a really good sign that, okay, we can actually watch other games and still see, you know, some good football being played, and we can see teams having to now step up their game to really get rewarded.
Yeah, and what will be the story for you?
No, for me, the story has to be definitely Ivory Coast, because they were on the verge of being dumped out. They were the best losers, and they went on to be eventual champions. And that correlates and strives into the fairy tale factor and underdog factor. The fairy tale factor is that they won in front of their fans. There were so many people that came, supported them, chanted them.
It was full.
The emotions were a lot.
They utilized their home advantage. They ended up becoming eventual winners, and they were almost knocked out. So it was a situation of we're about to leave and we ended up winning the competition. Then the Hala story, obviously, the fight from cancer, recovering, coming up, and scoring the winner in the final because he scored the second goal. And that goal, if you're a football lover, you understand that goal was a magnificent goal because his positioning was top notch. His athleticism in that position to score that goal was exceptionally brilliant. And one incredible thing about this Cote d'Ivoire side is that they're fixated on unity and tenacity. Because if you look at that team, the most technically gifted player in that team is Nicolas Pepe, and he was a fringe player. And he accepted his role as a fringe player. He wasn't trying to be disruptive. He wasn't throwing his toys out. He wasn't causing any chaos in dressing room. He accepted the fact that, yes, I'm the best player on this team if you look at naturally gifted ability. But at the end of the day, I accepted that I'll be a squad player. I'll motivate people. I'll cheer on. And anytime I'm needed, I'm going to step up to the front. So for me, I just love the fact that it's sad that they beat Nigeria, but I still have an admiration for their story.
Sorry, just to add to what you said, because I feel like this is one of the stories, because like Ivory Coast story is really really multifaceted, right? So we talk about Sebastian Haller, we talk about them hosting, we talk about even the fact that their captain was actually dripped with the Moroccan flag because Morocco had to knock out Zambia for them to qualify. So they were really huge fans of Morocco tournament. But I think like one really beautiful part that I've had a very strong resonance with was the fact that when they lost the last group stage match, they fired their manager, Gasset. And you know, he's a foreigner, but he was brought in, somebody that had done very well in the French leagues. The idea was that he would be a very good manager to really get the best out of this team. And he gets fired. And there's a story about them trying to loan Hervé Renard, who is managing the French women's team and who had managed them to AFCON victory in 2015. And they couldn't get Renard. You know, it's very last minute. You can't loan a manager like that in international football. So they decided to rely on Emasfe, who is a former international who was the assistant coach. Emasfe has only managed 4 games in his career as a manager, and he has won the African Cup of Nations, right? And it's just the kind of story where you have somebody who is, you know, a homegrown player, somebody who understands what it means, not just to the players, but also to the country. And I think it also adds this trend where for the third straight time, we've had an African coach who has played for his country that has now won the African Cup of Nations. In 2019, it was Bemadi for Algeria. 21, it was Aliou Cissé for Senegal, and now we have Imam Faye from Ivory Coast. And I think it just really speaks to this. It's really changing the narrative that you don't have to go abroad to find a good manager to come and manage your team. We have the talent domestically. I think it should also help to encourage more federations to really at least try to tap into that skill set within.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because when you talked about, for me and for a lot of us that engage in this, in the work that we do, there's a lot around how do we begin to look for talent internally, right? And even inspire a lot of people to care about working internally, because most times it seems like, and once you have a foreign experience, foreign certificate, even in our employment sector, it's almost like, oh, this supersedes what or rather you be giving priority over whomever grew up within the continent or has the qualifications from here. And I think when you made this, I didn't look at it from that perspective. It just got me thinking around the fact that we're not even understanding the power of the win for Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah. That you can imagine there are some younger players who would aspire to one day be part of that kind of success stories. And say, it could be me. I don't need to go to Europe. I don't need to go to the West to make a name, to be recognized. I can be recognized back home. And as we were discussing this and looking at just some of the success stories and the beautiful things from AFCON, I had to think about the social media conversations, because in all of this, we had the bans. And I think Nigerians were not really loved online this period, because Nigeria said, no, they try.
We're cooking everybody.
You were cooking everybody, dragging everybody. And that's why when we lost, you don't have anyone to sympathize with you, because people were happy for us losing. But what did you find interesting around the conversations on social media platforms during the AFCON?
The summary was that this was the AFCON for haters. I saw that online a lot. There's a story, I think this popular Twitter commentator who was in Cote d'Ivoire, and then they were watching the match. So it was Ghana-Egypt. So whenever Egypt scored, they were celebrating, and they're Nigerian. Whenever Ghana scored, the other person was celebrating. He now looks at the person, he's like, I'm Nigerian, we hate Ghana. The Ghana guy says, I'm Tunisian, we hate Egypt. And they celebrate. So like, you can see that level of, bias, but okay, fine. If I can't do well, my enemy should not do well, right? And but I think what was really also interesting was, even within the conversations that were being had, people were still trying to point out that, look, at the end of the day, this is a family affair, right? Like, we're all really bantering. At the end of the day, most Nigerians, at least to a degree on social media, were at least happy that, okay, fine, even if we weren't winning it was so good to stay in West Africa, right? So, and it was a case where it was really that level of, basketball and that level of engagement. And I think one thing I was really telling, right, and this is a bit of a sore topic, it was when Nigeria played South Africa in the semi-finals. There was a statement that came out by the High Commission there about, Nigerians being careful about celebrating, don't overdo it if we win. And there was this concern that it was so much that the SA, the foreign ministry spokesperson actually came out to say, this is actually not on it. This doesn't really speak to the camaraderie and the relationship that Nigeria has with South Africa. And I think that was also very good, because what people were still trying to do was, there was still this very important topic that was xenophobia, about the way that countries still relate to one another. And it was important to use this to push back, even when it came to issues around the North Africans playing football, right? So there were some memes going around that, okay, fine, AFCON has now started because, Morocco have been knocked out. And I think that was a very important point to now push back. And people did, about saying, well, actually, like in 2022, when Morocco reached the semi-finals, their manager was very insistent in saying that, look, FIFA doesn't have an Arab qualifier. FIFA has African qualifiers. So we getting here is not the Arab team getting to the semi-final. It's the African team reaching the semi-final. And they were very clear about that. So I think that these opportunities allow us to really push back against some very divisive narratives. And I think that was one thing that I was really happy about on the banter. So banter was very clear. Obviously, Nigerians not let Ghana rest. Even straight bullets, really, really interesting. But I think also a very good chance to at least have a more interesting conversation about how we see each other and how we can still see each other in a better, more unified light.
I even saw a post after we had won Angola in the quarterfinals.
Yeah.
I think the Angola team, their social media handler posted, "Congratulations, Nigeria, well deserved win," and all of that. And then I went to the comment section because that's where you see it.
Yeah.
That's where you see everything you want to see. In the comment section, someone said, "Oh, thank you for this. We will not attack you. You have G in your name, so let's face Ghana now." Because why were stray bullets going to Ghana all the time?
I didn't even understand.
Even when we had won South Africa, Ghana still suffered it.
Yeah, what did you think about this comment online?
No, for me, I think one thing that's really interesting and one thing that the world is figuring out now is that the Nigerian market is really huge.
Yeah.
If you want to go viral and can connect it to Nigerians or find a correlation with Nigerians, it's going to move the market more. And is needed. The banter online is needed because that pushed the AFCON narrative more. There's so many American celebrities talking about AFCON because of Nigerians had pushed it so much. The thing with Ghana is that there's always going to be this unspoken rivalry with Ghana. There's always going to be this competition spanning different industries. It comes from the music. It comes from the food. Who were Hidabasi one when they did their own? So many people came out, and it was never about what the other person is doing. It was about we have to beat Hidabasi. After Hidabasi's record was beaten, it was still yes, but Hidabasi did this. So it's always revolving. I think it's always revolving around Nigeria. But I think some of the comments went too far. But obviously, the important thing is that you should find humor in them. And the ones that go too far, it should be addressed. You say you shouldn't speak about this person. You shouldn't be condescending. You shouldn't be derogatory about this person. But the comments are needed for media coverage, for people to have a bigger understanding, for people to have the awareness that AFCON is actually going on. You see the comments on Twitter. We're not just trending in Nigeria, AFCON. We're trending globally. And that's the important conversation. The fact that people have attention and know that it's not just Euros. Euros is coming up. But AFCON just came through. And AFCON was successful to the point that people even forgot that Champions League is coming up. Every single person's focus was AFCON, not even Premier League. So banter, Twitter conversations, they are needed to push the narrative forward and give people a larger understanding of what is going on in football scene.
I really love that because I think I really felt proud to be African. And I don't follow football that much. I just go online to read analysis, and to understand the technicalities behind it. But I just love going on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, just to listen to the conversations, the videos, the skits, and everything. But I like the fact that one, it's projected our identity, who we are, that Africans are actually happy people, right? In all of the basketballs, it was mostly fun. Some went too far, but it was still vibing. Like I know there was this video from someone from Cameroon, like, "I'm so sorry, Nigeria. We are neighbors, so I don't mean to come after you, but please show me some love," you know. And then I was seeing so many others, and it just got me thinking, like, we are actually very connected. And the truth is, you can't profile a typical African because you can see someone doing a video, not sure. Most times you can't tell, is it not West Africa, South Africa? Somehow we almost all look alike, right? And I wish we can learn a lot from AFCON around Africa unity, solidarity, and even the way we engage and demand accountability. Because I'm also looking at what are the lessons from AFCON in our respective countries. What can we even learn on how players are treated, on how decisions around who would manage a club and a team, and how we can't tolerate mediocrity when it comes to sport. What can we learn from that, and even how we build our system? Before I get into that conversation, why is AFCON significant, especially in the period of the time we exist today?
Okay, so for me, one of the reasons why I love AFCON so much is that it actually spotlights African football. There's always this conversation that African footballers are on par with European footballers. I don't believe it necessarily, but I'm an African. But it always gives us an ability to showcase our skill set, and from there that can spotlight certain players who go on to play European football. They bring their experience back to the African scene, and that makes the African players better. Secondly, the unification factor. We were talking about AFCON. Now, the last AFCON, imagine $1 billion being injected to the economy. It goes beyond AFCON. Last AFCON, Cote d'Ivoire spent close to $1 billion. Those are capital intensive projects. You have $1 billion invested into the economy. We're talking about tourism. We're talking about increased employment rates. We're talking about better balance of payment, balance of trade structure. So if all these things are coming to your country, and if all these things are spotlighting the market in Africa, so a lot of Europeans are going to see, oh, the market in Africa is actually incredibly huge. Why don't I come invest? So you are bringing more investment into your country, not just your country alone, Africa as a whole. And then one thing I really loved about this AFCON that I really, really loved, the controversies were limited. We now have controversy of this person was raped. We now have controversy this person was physically assaulted. There was always unity. You could see that during the celebrations, it wasn't over the top where people were being attacked. People were not sore losers. They lost and they were graceful about it. they lost and they succumbed. Okay, we've lost this game. Thank you. We want to see much more from this tournament. Let's see where the tournament is going. So all those factors just come in place. Unification, what it does for economy, what it does for tourism, and just what it does for football lovers around the world. We football lovers will always want to consume football. And sometimes not just about consuming what we see on the European stage, we also want to consume what we're seeing from our homegrown players and from African players.
When you look back at what AFCON is meant to stand for, it's really about Pan-African unity. It's really one of these areas where, okay, fine, everybody does this everywhere else, but then see how we do it, back home. And when AFCON first started, even when it comes to some of the different initial controversies, like South Africa wasn't allowed to play at the first AFCON because they only go to field all white players. And
that was really apartheid.
Yeah, during the apartheid era. And they got banned all the way down to 96. And when you look at even the story of the continent, you can really point out several huge markers with AFCON. 1996, SA has come back from the apartheid era. In 94, they had the big Rugby World Cup. They host AFCON 96.
Yeah.
And they win it on home soil. You have Mandela giving it to
that was magical.
South Africa winning the competition was such a very big moment, especially for boosting their own particular sport. You look at even issues down to Nigeria, for example, like in 1980, this is actually the first tournament since we returned to democracy in 1979, and Nigeria win it on home soil. Shagari that's giving the cup, to the, I mean, like there are many of these moments about how the continent has grown, how countries have developed, that you can trace back to the way that we relate with sports. So it's a really, really big moment and a really big tool in that particular area. And I think just going back to the point about that unity, one of the things that you rarely see, so nowadays we usually see the winners giving the runners up a guard of honor. So where the players line both sides and they're going to collect their medals. We saw the reverse again during this tournament, where Nigerians actually lined up, say, you know what, you guys have won the tournament. We will give you a guard of honor as well as they're going to collect your medals. That doesn't usually happen. So I think there are many of these interesting, small things that were really put at play. I think the one thing I was going to add to the way AFCON is important is that it forces a conversation about the way that Africans should treat themselves. And I think a really big point is about accountability. So you mentioned about the stadiums that have been built. In the next month, years, the question is now, what happens to those stadiums, right? So one of the training grounds in Ebimpe, I think, one of the local teams in Abidjan has now moved in to take over that particular area. And that's a good idea, right? Because hopefully it means that you can keep the maintenance structure going. The question is now, the big stadiums like the one in Ebimpe that hosted the final, what happens there? It's a 60,000 capacity stadium. Is really huge. One of the most modern stadiums on the continent right now. What happens there? How do you make sure that it is sustained? We saw pictures in Brazil, after the Olympics and the World Cup, where they were basically giant bus storage garages, right?
Same thing in Qatar. The stadium was looking dilapidated.
Exactly. After the World Cup. So it's a case of how do you now maintain that? And I think even down to leadership, right?
Yes.
Ivory Coast did not waste time with firing their manager after the group stages.
Yes.
And imagine if we treated our own political leaders
like
with the
that.
same level of accountability. Nigerians, wrongly dragging Iwobi on social media, but then rightly protesting about the fact that, okay, fine, there needs to be a better, level of engagement with the way that, we hold our players to higher standards than we do to our leaders.
We should communicate it better.
Exactly. But then also we hold them to higher standards than we do our leaders. And that's actually where a problem is, because really and truly, the level of attention should have been even more when it comes to, okay, fine, who is the NFF president? Who is the Minister of Sports? Who are the people who are in a position to make sure that
NFF
next time
Council,
that things change. So I think it gives us that avenue to say, okay, fine, this is how we actually like to be treated. This is how we like to be considered. And we can apply this not only in sports, which is obviously very important to Africans, but also across the board.
Yeah, I love the fact when you talked about we hold our players to a higher standard than we hold our leaders. And I was just, if we're just looking at our settings, our elected officials, for instance, these are individuals who represent us in government. And when they fail to perform, we're not even quick to call them out. The way we went after Iwobi, which I felt like that was, it's moved to bullying, right? But even the way we get angry with our teams when they don't perform well, when we make analysis, say, the guy did not even, that was useless. We could not play. We didn't play well. We didn't come with our A games. The way we went and talked about Cote d'Ivoire, they fired the manager. I don't want to even go into the issues around leadership in Cote d'Ivoire right now, right? Because you also know the president, However, I feel like AFCON, beyond sport was a learning experience, because I told you what I do basically is shoot a lot of analysis beyond. I mean, I watch some of the games. I just realized that when it comes to sport, we demand a lot more.
Yeah, we do.
However, when it comes to how we engage with our systems, we expect whatever it gives to us. And I think as Africans, we need to change that mentality. Most times, the way we approach leaders is almost like master-servant relationship. Like, oh, you know, in Nigeria, this Oga at the top gets on my nerves. When people say Oga, my Oga, or our boss, so you see the president, people are bowing, or you see your House of Reps member, your senator, and we're clearing the road for them. And I'm like, these are people that represent us. If we expect our sport team to perform optimally well, then we should also expect our leaders, because they actually are more accountable to us than our players, right? Our players is a sport. They are projecting but they are not determining our security and welfare.
Exactly.
And I think for me, that was one thing I'm hoping that with the way we engaged AFCON, I mean, I was following Ghana. Ghanaians were pissed and upset with their players, and some of them were crying. And I know Ghana last year, they had this major protest around the state of economy in the country. And so almost every African country is dealing with one major challenge or the other. But that level of accountability, I'm not seeing that energy we have in sport. I'm not seeing how much we're tapping from that into our daily engagement with government. And from these, I want to get straight to the question around quality, because we've just celebrated the end of this AFCON. We're planning for the next. When it comes to the conversation around sport globally, do we think our teams, African teams now, are well positioned to compete equally with the foreign teams, especially towards the World Cup, for instance? Most times at the World Cup, it's like the Africans that perform are the Africans playing in foreign clubs. Most times. I didn't say all the time. And I'm just wondering, is there something we can do better to either build upon quality or concentrate on quality when it comes to our players within the continent, and even how we approach sports and generally?
I think it's a very good point you raised about quality, because this is the first AFCON, if I'm not mistaken, under or at least one of the first under Patrice Motsepe. So that's the new CAF president. And most of the former presidents from CAF have been, either established football administrators who have just been in that culture throughout. So things have just usually stayed the same. Motsepe is a businessman, he's a billionaire, he owns a football club, but he's mostly from the private sector when it comes to how he's engaged with sports. And we've seen the way CAF has really leaned in on, really building many partnerships. There was a whole hoopla about Super Sport not having the rights, but then it's because the money had gone to a very well-placed Togolese company that was able to now sell the rights to even more, international countries to even watch the tournament. And even just the way that it's been able to really engage with many of the different groups on ground. So I think there's a level of accountability in terms of how it also shows us how we can look at different leadership structures and how these things can actually change the way that we engage with leadership on the continent. But when it comes to the quality of football, I think one thing that's really interesting is that we are seeing a sort of reverse migration trend, right? So historically, you see countries where they've won tournaments and you've seen clearly that, okay, fine, if all things were equal, this person will not be playing for this country. So you have countries like France, for example. In 98, in 2018, both their World Cups were built off a very strong migrant population, right?
Yeah.
And obviously they identify with France. They are French. You even see in Belgium's golden generation that's about to pass on now. There are still very strong players there.
African heritage,
exactly. Now, one thing that is changing is that either because it's difficult to break into the particular national pools, or even just because there's a very strong tie. Now, okay, fine, let me play for my country. People are beginning to play or come back to their domestic, or at least to the continent. And I think that will lead to two things. One, we can change the way that the expectation is, but then two, it's also bringing a different standard, saying, okay, fine, this is what I'm used to, this is what we can now build, this is what I think we should really drive and change. We're also seeing players who are now coming back. So many players who have been experienced, the likes of a Drogba in Cote d'Ivoire, likes of Anakocha in Nigeria, Eto'o in Cameroon, they're coming back trying to lead the organizations. Now, all of them have not been ideal. Eto'o has had, issues, many different corruption allegations. He even resigned, but then they told him to stay on. But then you are seeing some that are even trying to look at it from different perspectives. Mane has a club. You have Oneni that has his own club. You have Mahrez that is investing in different areas. And what they're trying to do is obviously they'll bring their own level of expertise to really try and change the way the continent is engaging. And when you look at even administrators, like I mentioned Mauritania, there's Cape Verde as well. Like these are different groups that in their own small subtle ways are trying to say, okay, fine. Just because historically we just hired people to come and then they just play and then they go doesn't mean that we don't need to be better. It doesn't mean that we don't need to really invest. And it even looks at things like investment, even looking at women's football, for example, looking at, okay, how do we now build up that level of engagement? You know, the AFCON actually, that was in Morocco 2 years ago, you know, the level of engagement that was there was even high. And we saw that translate to the Women's World Cup later on in Australia and New Zealand, where, you know, we actively followed the African teams that were there. So I think the level of investment is building. The level of attention is building. And I think it's coming from not just politicians knowing that, okay, if this country does well and I'm there holding the cup, I look good. It's a case where you know, people are actually saying, okay, fine. I like that my team is doing well. I like that we can even invest, that we can get money there. And I think that's something that's going to really lead to a better standard in
investing in building talent and investing. Yeah, what's your thought?
Yeah, first of all, when we're talking about the conversation pertaining quality, no, we do not have the quality that European teams have. They are more technically gifted. They have better structures. They have better players. They have more exposed players. Their systems, they are better. But one interesting thing about this tournament, and a lot of people picked it out, Hard Guy Never talk about it, Jamie Carragher talk about it, and these are some of the biggest pundits on the planet. They spoke about how well we handle VAR. Now, VAR has failed miserably in Europe, and because of the time wasting, because football sometimes you just want it to flow as fast as possible. I'm not trying to take shots at American football, but they have too many stoppages, too many breakages, want it to flow as fast as possible, and sometimes VAR kills the momentum of the game. But in Africa, we're able to handle VAR as adequately as possible, make sure that, we've gotten decision, we know what decision is, let's move forward. But in terms of quality, it deals with a deliberate and intentional effort. If you want the quality to be at a certain point in the next 30 years, where it matches up with the talent from Europe, it can actually be possible. It's possible that it gets ascertained, but you need to be intentional about it. Now, one interesting thing about us in Nigeria is that we have this mindset where we do not prioritize properly. Now you're talking about the Iwobi thing. We have displaced priorities. Look at the Mohbad situation. A lot of people came out to protest about Mohbad's situation. He needs to get justice. We need to find the killers. But that was basically a month after the petrol situation, and we just adapted to that. But the thing is that people have a myopic view. What they are saying is that these players on the pitch, these players need to perform. And one thing about me, all my years of watching football, I've never criticized a player for having a bad performance. You have good days at the office, you have bad days at the office. I'll always criticize a player for not giving his all. And there are certain players that look like they are not giving their all. And I think that's where the problem comes from with Nigerians. So you always have to give your all. Sometimes give your all, you fail. Sometimes give your all, you win. That's just life. But and then in terms of quality, we cannot match that unless we're intentional. And see, there can always be a momentum shift. There are times where European football is better than South American football. There are times where South American football is better than European football. Africans, we can actually include ourselves in that conversation, but it depends on how intentional we are. He spoke about investment. How many people are willing to invest in this? And from what I'm seeing, there's huge potential, because from the output or what we generated from this AFCON exam, there's a little, is myopic, is little, but there's some sort of belief from a lot of people that African football can actually reach the potential that we know it can get to. So that's the most important thing, being intentional about the efforts.
Yeah, and we can reach that potential, because when you said in the next 30 years, it means we need to start planning now. And it's what we do in our respective countries. And it got me, because you mentioned women football, and I was just thinking around female sports. Recently, there was this news around this Zambian forward, Rachel Kundanji. Yeah, and they said she's the most expensive transfers in women's football history. And I was just wondering around how we engage women's sport. So be it the Women African Cup of Nations or even the Women World Cup and the different other sports beyond just football, basketball and a host of others. Do we think there are things we could do better to project women's sport to be at par with male sport? Give them the popularity that they do deserve and even invest in that space?
I think the level of investment is very key. And I will admit that one of the things I was very surprised about during the banter was the fact that nobody pointed out that Nigeria has almost 3 times as many women African Cup of Nations titles as any other country.
Yeah.
Because we've almost gone like, I think 11 or 12 or 14. So like there was a point where it was Nigeria. So like nobody even pointed out the fact that when it comes to women football, we don't send you. But I think one of the key things there is you're looking at level of exposure, you're looking at investment, right? Yes. And like you mentioned, Kundanji, who is now in Bay FC, right? The first person that he got, the first major signing was actually Nigeria's assistant Oshola, who they got from Barcelona. And Barcelona is arguably the best female club team on the planet. So you can see that there's investment there, because for these guys to sign these 2 players in the same window, it means that there's a lot of money that's coming into that club.
Of 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of money coming into the club. So what we should be looking at now is, okay, fine, how do we now maximize that effort? One thing that I wanted to really build on, I touched on, was investment, right? In the late 1990s, actually after the O2 World Cup, Germany was at a very low point in their football. They had crashed out of the group stages of the next Euros. You know, things are really, really bad. What Germany now decided to do was that they changed the way the club ownership structure was in the country. They made sure that almost every major club had an academy to make sure that they could build players. They now started working on actually making sure that the succession when it comes to the national team is really much more stronger. They bid to host the World Cup in 2006. So this is not like earlier on, right? And they are building on that. In 2014, in Brazil, Germany wins the World Cup. Now we go back to Spain. Spain had its own golden generation. They had a very bad time. Spain now ended up saying, okay, fine, we'll now start building off the clubs that are doing very well. 2010, Spain wins the World Cup. England makes the St. George's Park, which is now meant to be like the national center of excellence. And this is like in the early 2020s, in the early 2000s, thereabouts. And then we get to a point where England is now in the Euros final, the World Cup semi-final. So it's just showing that this level of investment might not come now. Yeah. But then it's something that you're building on for later. And you're looking at players, you're looking at, even though when we're looking at development, you're looking at young people who would ordinarily, let's say, have been easily tied to other more at least much more illegal forms of getting what they call like money, right? And they are now encouraged to actually follow sport, passion. You're looking at even just changing the way that we're investing in this. And just to point out to accountability, Nigeria got, I think, roughly $4 million from finishing second. One of the important questions should now be, where is that money pumped into? What does that go into? So making sure that, okay, fine, at the end of the day, we have AFCON in Morocco next year. How are we making sure that the money is pulled back to make sure that we have more Osimens, we have more Wabalis, who are able to really pull and really help push the country going forward.
Yeah. When you talked about where's the money, for me, it's about what we're planning and how we're planning today for tomorrow. And there was a point I didn't even think around. The fact that we have young people who have talent who could go into illegal means of making monies, right? And there's an opportunity to tap that energy and pull them into very viable spaces where they can utilize those talents that they have. And I do believe that Africa is blessed with lots of talent. Like, this is one continent that you could pick anywhere. And we're resilient individuals. There's a reason why in the Olympics we do perform well, at least for the long distance, Kenya and Ethiopia. But beyond that, I think if we see how people of African heritage perform when they are playing or when they are within foreign clubs, it just shows that all they needed was the right atmosphere, the good environment, the good investment. That was all they needed, and that was what made them who they are. And so if we can think about that within our continent, perhaps in the next 30 years, I'm working with your plan. Thankfully, I'll still be alive in 30 years.
They should hire me to draft up a blueprint for them so that next 30 years.
They should hire you. This is a job. This is a job advertisement.
This is a job ad. Hire me in the next 30 years. You'll be comparing with Man United and
let's talk future. What
for winners?
I'm telling you, just hire me.
Don't worry. The job we'll start the advocacy for you. But let's talk future. What future outlook for AFCON, right? And this is where anyone would be your reflection of what you want to see when it comes to what the future should look like for AFCON.
I'll make it brief. I like the fact that AFCON is now going around the continent. Before it used to be usually central west, a bit north. This year was in Cote d'Ivoire. The next one is in Morocco. The one after that is in East Africa. So that's Kenya, Tanzania, Namibia, and Uganda and Tanzania. And they haven't hosted it in a long time. So while going around, and obviously what that means is that the host countries now know that they can put investment, either in infrastructure, in trying to build their own team so that they can actually perform very well. So I like that we're going around. And I'm hoping that what that means is that there's now a concerted effort to build these different structures so that by the time we have enough of the regions really playing a very good hosting role, people feel much more tied and much more invested in African football becoming better.
So for me, I feel Cote d'Ivoire have set the bar really, really high. So it's now up to certain teams to now meet up with that bar. Morocco hosting tournament next year, there's always going to be comparison what Cote d'Ivoire has done. And there's a huge chance it might not get to the point that Cote d'Ivoire got to. And that is always going to bring criticism their way. That's one thing you need to understand. But certain factors like how good the stadium is, the infrastructure, people not being sore losers, people gracefully exiting the competition, the unity, the compassion you show, those are things that should always be there. Fairy tale stories, you are not in control of that. The footballing gods are in control of that. The footballing gods may decide that this person finishes third and best loser and wins the tournament. The footballing gods might say that, oh, this person wins all their games so they win the finals. Things like that. But the VAR issue, how well the stadiums are, how punctual time is, good officiating, all those things, the bar has been set tremendously high. And now Morocco have to meet up with that bar. And for Nigeria as a country, the football needs to get better next time. We're very lucky getting to the final this time. Every single football fan will tell you that, oh, we got to the final, but we know we're lucky. There's a general acknowledgement that we're poor against South Africa. We're poor in the final. We're abysmal. We're horrific in that final because we actually did not throw a punch. We were on the rope. Anybody that watches boxing understand. We were on the rope throughout the game.
We're more defensive than we should have been.
We're more defensive than we should have been. So, obviously, just the bar has been set really high. Let's be able to match up with what Cote d'Ivoire has done.
Sorry. My concern generally, we've all answered this really well. And my concern is really about Nigeria. So, talking about quality and how Ivory Coast had to fire their manager and all of that. What do we think about the coach, Nigeria's Super Eagles coach, Jose, and his performance generally? And I think his contract expires this February, right?
Yeah, it actually expired at the end of the match.
At the end of the match. Okay, so now I think I checked the news and it seems like he's expecting that his contract might be extended. Or someone, I think Emmanuel Amunike also is, is being pushed to be. What do we think about the coach and the coaching team's performance generally this AFCON?
I mean, I will put out that I think we need a better plan around the coaching structure. So someone like Aliou Cisse has been Senegal's coach for nearly 10 years now. And what Aliou Cisse has done is he took them from when they reached the quarterfinal, they got knocked out in 2017. Then in 2019, they reached the final, they lost to Algeria. 2021, they won. 2023, they got knocked out, but he's still there, right? And what that now shows is that obviously because he's the national team manager, the under 23 teams know, okay, fine, this is how this country wants to play. So they can now work in terms of saying, okay, let us now work on a better transition plan. So somebody who is a younger player can now play for the national team. One of their star players this year, Kamara, who actually plays in midfield, he was part of the home-based Senegalese players who won the domestic Cup of Nations last year. And he now played for Senegal this time. So I think what we need to do is, whether it's Pesero, whether it's Amunike, whether it's even, like whoever it is, what we need to do is make sure that there's stronger intentional planning when it comes to these things, right? Nigeria has won the Under-17 World Cup 5 times. No other country has done that. And we've not won the World Cup. That's one of the most
that's one of the most shocking theories and facts.
Absurd facts, right? So it's kind of thing where if we had planned this thing better, there's no reason why none of those players would not have reached there. And to show you that, we had Chukwueze and Osimhen, who are part of the last Nigerian team that won the Under-17 World Cup, and now they are playing for the Super Eagles, right? So if you had better structure, better planning, right, you have many of these other players that have done very well. Mikel Obi and Taiwo were on the same pitch with Lionel Messi and Di Maria, right? Messi won the World Cup 17 years later. Mikel Obi and Taiwo had retired and Nigeria wasn't even at the World Cup. So it's that level of planning. It's okay, we sit down. It's not to rush. we know fully well now that if we're starting from scratch, we shouldn't expect to win it next year. But you know that, okay, if you trust the process, like many Arsenal fans might appreciate, or if you actually just follow through with the planning, you know, okay, what we are building is for tomorrow. We're building bigger, we're building better, we're building a structure so that many of these young players, anybody that comes in knows that if I hold my head down, I play well and I work hard, I can play for the Eagles and I can win for the Eagles.
Yeah. Do you have final thoughts?
Final thoughts. The thing with the coach is that there's always this communication problem. So anytime I look at a team, I want to see a coach assert, impact his philosophy on that team. Now the question is, what are they doing? What are they doing when you see them on the pitch? And I won't go further than that and say, what exactly are they trying to do? Today, they're a defensive-minded team. Tomorrow, they are trying to attack. Tomorrow, they are high pressing. Tomorrow, they are holding ball in midfield. Tomorrow, they are tip-tap, 1-2 football. So it's always very confusing. And I genuinely feel maybe there's a communication problem. But from the outlook, from the outset, you can't really see it. You need people inside to actually trace what exactly is the issue. What is the coach telling them, and why are they doing something different from what the coach is telling them when they are on the pitch? So I just think we just need to close up that communication gap, and we need to know, oh, this is what the coach is telling them. Who are the players that can fit into this philosophy? Who are the players that can't? If the player cannot fit into the philosophy, you shelf him out. Not every single player has to be part of this team, no matter how good you are as an individual. You need to fixate yourself and focus on the team. So I just want him to bridge that communication gap, so at least we have an idea. I know what I'm seeing when I see Cote d'Ivoire play. Moving forward from the round of 16 down to the final, you know what to expect when you see Cote d'Ivoire play. You know what to expect when you see Senegal play. You know what to expect when you see South Africa play. None of us here know what to expect when we see Nigeria play. It's always a gamble. We might see this, we might see this. So at least we need to have that element of predictability, knowing that this is what we're going to see. And you might not win, but we know this is what we're going to see.
Yeah. Oh my! No, it's been an amazing conversation, and I feel so sad we have to end this conversation here because I really enjoyed listening to your perspectives around these different issues. But one of the things that for me is important is that when we are in this whole era of Africa Rising, that beyond our music and our movies, that we also have our sport, our football, trending globally, and that for me is what is important. But that for all our respective countries, that there are lessons for us as Africans, but there are also lessons for us on how we engage our government institutions. And this is where we come to the end of the conversation today. I'll leave it over to my co-host to shout out to our audience.
Thank you so much for watching and staying with us. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and of course, share. Please share. Okay? Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you to all our guys behind the scene making this podcast as beautiful as ever. We usually end with a cheers to Africa, and thankfully we're talking about AFCON. So this is the best time. And we will say when you're on, you're amplified. So we go, when you're on, you're amplified. Cheers to Africa.